Hello and welcome to another panel, our second panel of the weekend for Spotlight Indie's Big Indie Weekend. For this panel, I've got a full raft of amazing authors, readers, and just generally wonderful people. And we're going to talk about something that maybe is less wonderful in certain contexts. We've got war wounds and battle scenes. So something a bit grimdark to start off your afternoon. Which sounds great. So I'm going to go around clockwise to introduce our panelists because I like clocks. So I'm going to go around that direction and just let them introduce themselves, their books, and generally who they are. So Lee, can we start with you, please?
All right, my name is Lee C Conley, author of the Dead Saga series. Shameless plug. There's one. Oh, it's blurring. Woo. And then there's another. And there's a few more out there coming out as well. Loads of like short story novellas, things like that. I generally write horror and fantasy. A lot of grimdark, which is probably why Alex has invited me along. I'm also a senior instructor of longsword and medieval combat as well. So again, probably why I'm here. Nice to meet you all.
Perfect. And Frank.
Yeah, I'm Frank Dorrian. I'm a grimdark fantasy author. It's pretty much all I write, all I know, like just to pigeonhole myself. I have authored books such as Horns of the Hunter, To Brave the End, Scars of the Sand, and Shadow of the High King.
Lovely. And Steve?
Hello, yeah, I'm Steve Pannett, self-published author of The Hunter's Lament and start of a new series, Sins of Steel and Shadow. I write kind of what I call gritty fantasy fiction, so it's kind of in that grey area between being sort of epic and high fantasy and grimdark. So we're in the borderlands when it comes to grimness.
Excellent. And Charlie?
Hey there, I'm Charlie Cavendish. I'm feeling very inadequate in such awesome company. I'm not an author. I'm a reader, podcaster. So I suppose some people might know from the Four Beardsmen of the Bookpocalypse, which we do panel interviews, and we have do some RPG sessions as well, which is quite fun. Did this one yesterday with Anna Spark-Smith, which was quite entertaining, so worth checking out. And to do some reviewing on Fanfight as well when the time allows. So yeah, that's me.
No, I think that's great. I think we're going to have lots of perspectives on both sides of the keyboard there, so that's going to be helpful. So if we can start off with the good versions of the good examples of war or wounds or battle scenes and things from speculative fiction. So does anybody have any good examples of memorable or effective like war or battle scenes or things moments they thought were very well done in fiction? I'll just throw that out to the room. So
I've got a few if you want me to start off with that.
Absolutely.
Alex. So I made a few notes. I'm very organized. So but one of my favorite ever in one-on-one combat scenes is not from fantasy. It's kind of horror. It is horror, I suppose. It's actually from The Fisherman by John Langham. I don't know if any of you guys have read that. It's absolutely fantastic book. Now they do an axe fight on the beach, and I just find it's incredibly well written. The pacing on the fights is not only sort of realistic but also quite epic, which is the balance which I will talk about probably at some point in this chat. But yeah, absolutely fantastic fight scene, and it's not even from a fantasy book per se. It's just, but it's kind of has that vibe though. It does have that sort of. It would fit straight in. Listen to that. As far as big battle scenes go, I think it has to be mentioned The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. Absolutely, mate. The entire book is just one huge battle. Absolutely fantastic. And then there's Bernard Cornwell as well. Now, if you see this in Sharp, and you'll see this in his like Warlord Chronicles, you see it in all his books. But both Bernard Cornwell and Joe Abercrombie, they really use the fog of war really well. And I think that's like absolutely perfect for battle scenes, But anyway, I'll come back to that in a bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, some good examples and good things we can follow up on. I like that. You're already foreshadowing the rest of the panel. Anybody else got any good examples they want to throw up?
Yeah, I'll give one. So one that I always come back to, especially when you're thinking about like maybe like your sort of meat and potatoes kind of fantasy, and your meat and potatoes sort of template fantasy battles that works really well. It was Dumais Wells from Wheel of Time 6, The Lord of Chaos. It's where the Asherman arrive and basically like save Rand's ass, and they just all start like jumping through portals, and they're like it's kind of like messy, but it was like the turn like these sort of like villainy sort of grey characters into like living artillery, and it was just I didn't expect it when I was reading the book, and it just turned like the entire thing is that it's just massive, chaotic, but really well structured and very strangely clean and effective, kind of brutal, like explosion at the end of the book, and it was just absolutely immense. Like, and that one always kind of like stands out to me, and it's one that I try to sort of like refer back to when I'm like thinking about like pacing and structure.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned pacing and structure. I think that's something, you know, Lee, you've also touched on that. So I suspect we'll come back to that.
Yeah. Well, I think an example is not probably not many people have read yet because it's not out. So it's a little bit unfair to mention it, perhaps. But I recently read Warlords of, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but it's Owari. So it's by Baptiste Pinson Wood. So it's samurai, basically set in that sort of that sort of Shogun-esque timeline. A lot of the characters in the book are which I subsequently found out are actually historical characters from Japan. A lot of warlords. So it was a sort of pre-uniting of Japan when there was sort of all different kingdoms, and interesting times when, you know, guns had just started to be introduced, so there was still a relatively new introduction into that. And some of the battles there really is that sort of that ebb and flow of a sort of almost like a being or a sort of entity in its own right, with, you know, cavalry entering and then of samurai charging each other, and you know, that absolute chaos of, once it starts, no one really knew what was going on until you know, the dust clears. So I just thought that it was, I've had all those exciting elements, but also just brought in that sort of almost that sort of organic sort of creature of, you know, different elements of the battle come in there. You know, there's a cavalry charge, there's the use of guns, which are effective up to a point, and then, you know, that changes again. So yeah,
I think this is so interesting that we've touched on probably 3 points we're going to be hitting on as through lines throughout this conversation, which is structure, pacing, and chaos. That's kind of like that to me feels like the trifecta of kind of a good foundation for a decent fight scene or a battle scene in general. I just wanted a +1 for Lee. The Heroes was definitely on my list in terms of that book. Is mad because if you pitched it to someone, it sounds just like this self-contained thing that should be maybe a couple of chapters. For it to be an entire novel and still be as brilliant as it is, I mean, testament to Joe's writing, obviously, but just as a battle scene goes, yeah, there's so much you can learn as a writer from just reading that again and again and again, to be quite honest. And then zooming in, I just wanted to throw in a bit of a wild card from me, which is kind of in, again, the borderlands between fiction and science fantasy, but there's a scene in The Drawing of the Three from Stephen King's Dark Tower series where Roland goes into New York through one of his door portals, and he actually pulls Eddie out of a fight scene with a bunch of mobsters. And the character of Eddie is completely naked throughout the fight. And Roland even calls attention to how much that changes how important it is, how he fights. And it's just like, it's stuff like that I don't think many writers would necessarily consider it, because you think, well, I'm writing a fight scene, so all that really matters is what are they armed with? What are they going at each other with? You know, you think about the big things, but for Stephen King to notice that, you know, fighting naked is a skill in its own respect. It's details like that I think really kind of, they add a bit of colour to fight scenes and battle scenes. So yeah, I'm going to throw that in as a bit of a wild card.
Very Stephen King.
It's one of my favourite series. Is that's actually probably the book that I finished reading that series, and then I literally put the last book down and went, I'm going to write a book. That was the moment when I finished that series. Wow. Crazy, yeah, amazing series.
Yeah,
there we go. Okay, so we've already touched on, you know, as you say, the trifecta of elements to include. So we want to talk about like tropes or things to avoid as well. So, Lee, as you said, you're teach longsword, and Frank, I know that you're a martial artist as well. So I'm also curious to see if there's anything that you guys see in fight scenes or battle scenes in fiction that you think, well, that's just not how that works, you know. So I'll throw that maybe out to you guys first, and then we'll, you know, Charlie and Steve, we can come on to anything that you guys want to add as well.
Do you want to run first, Frank?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, you're quite right. There's like, I think when you've got like experience in fighting yourself, like I fight Thai boxing. Like I'm preparing for a fight at the minute, so it's this kind of thing is like kind of forefront of my mind right now. When you've got experience of being in like a live scenario, you know, and you know how a fight will actually play out, there are like little things that sometimes when you read fight scenes, it'll kind of make you stop and think, I'm going to make it that wouldn't work, that wouldn't happen. You know, like that's not realistic. And, you know, part of that is just your own internal bias. And, you know, I think you have to step away from that, especially if you've got the experience, and think more in terms of, you know, is it written in a way that sort of it's gritty enough to make you go, ooh, like, or sort of stylized enough to think, wow, that's cool. Like, but some things I see is like, if it gets too matrixy kind of stuff, to me, where people are like levitating and like doing triple spinny kicks and stuff, that kind of drags me out of the writing. Or things where I don't know, like I read sometimes, like people like blocking kicks with like punches and stuff like that. I mean, I think it all depends, like, whether or not you'd establish the rules of your world as well. But yeah, stuff like people who fall into writing things blow by blow, play by play, where it gets too detailed, too minute, like, and I think that's something that if you have got experience of fighting, you probably fall into a trap of yourself, because you know how it will play out step by step. But also things like plot armor, like people who are like just, they're untouched because it's dictated by the story. You know, things like that, like stuff like that tends to pull me out a lot. But especially the really like minute blow by blow stuff, like, you know, I stepped here 1 inch, I did this punch, that kind of writing, I think, is one definitely to avoid. I don't know how Lee feels on it, but I'm guessing that you got some similar thoughts from nods.
I think you've been reading my notes, Frank. But no, it's good. What I want to talk about on this one was the realism versus the epic. So I fight longsword. So I'll tell you now, the average sword exchange, and this is the same for Japanese sword, for, you know, when Charlie was talking about his book, the book he was reading earlier. The average sword fight lasts mere seconds, okay? So even when I'm fighting because I fight quite a lot, I fight in a lot of competitions, I've come away with quite a lot of gold medals as well, so I'm not too bad. But when I'm fighting even fairly seasoned opponents, if they fall for my feint and I kill them on the second hit, we're talking 2 or 3 seconds. Now, if I'm fighting someone really quite good, and I know they're good and they've got a reputation, I'm a bit more wary. I might not throw in the game straight away. So there'll be a bit more circling. There's a bit of circling. Most of the fight's probably circling, just testing each other's defenses, you know, seeing if they're going to parry that, seeing if they're going to parry this before you go in for that kill shot. And the kill shot's usually on what we call a second or third intent. So you will throw in a cut, which is meant to be parried, which opens them up somewhere else. You will then go around and hit them there, and maybe somewhere else straight away. And it's usually, it's bang, 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 dead. When we look at Napoleonic warfare, the hand-to-hand combat is over within seconds. They are literally 1, 2, dead, 1, 2, dead. You know, it's very, very quick, or at least injured, maybe not dead, but at least injured. And I find if you're writing, now as writers, we've got a duty to entertain the audience. So there is room for this big epic fight scene that goes and goes and goes. Now, I imagine some of Frank's fights, I imagine Frank can fight many rounds. His fights might last 20, 30 minutes, you know, because it's hand on hand. It's not instant death. Unless he's breaking someone's hand, and then it puts them out the fight within seconds. Hand-to-hand combat fights can last a lot longer. But when it comes to weapons, it's over in seconds, which is quite boring, you know. So I think, as Frank was saying, the other thing I see, especially with people who do what I do in the sword fighting stuff, they will basically write a form of sword porn. They will write, and they will use terminology which no one understands. They'll be like, oh, he goes into this guard, he goes into, you know, this guard, that guard. And they'll be using fancy French and German names. He'll be using words that only people who are trained to use them know. And people don't know this. You've got to simplify things down. That's a trope I see from people who know a lot about combat and don't write for the entertainment, they write for realism. And sometimes it can ruin it. And if you did write it realism, it'd be over straight away. So drawn out long fights are not realistic, as I say, with swords at least, unless you, I mean, there is a place for it. Don't get me wrong, there's a place for it. So you might want to write for more entertaining, a long sort of duel between the two main characters and the main antagonist. Great, but you've got to keep it short. You've got to keep it sort of not too long, because it just, people get tired. I've written injuries end fights here as well. One of my nasty little tricks that I do all the time is I will hit you on the wrist, which will break your wrist, and you're out straight away. Womp, done. Sorry, you're dead, and then I'll stab you. And it seconds, literally seconds. But I've written here, short realism is boring. The other thing, the other trope is Frank touched on this as well, is plot armor. I hate plot armor. If any of you have read any of my stuff, you'll know that I quite happily kill the main protagonist. I'll just kill him on a whim, and then I'll take over with some other protagonist. You know, so I think shocking, brutal, pointless deaths are awesome, and I think people use plot armor. And it's just boring, isn't it? You know their main character is just going to survive, and they're in book 2 and 3, so you know that they're going to be fine. I think plot armor is a terrible thing, and even the greatest heroes can die out of nowhere. You know, King Harold breaks the neck.
Steve knows about this. He knows the point I'm making about it in his most recent book, and I haven't forgiven him.
Yeah, just a few tropes to avoid. Sorry, just to finish off is watch out for the over-realistic fights where it's point by point in the weird terminology. That's boring. Watch out for making it too realistic because it's just going to be over straight away. But then again, if it is like Frank was saying, people levitating and doing triple spin kicks, it absolutely pulls me out as well. I'm just like, that's rubbish. What is going on here? So it's a balance. You've got to find the balance between entertainment and realism, but also in the middle, brutality. That's just my personal opinion because I'm a very brutal writer. You've got to have this brutal gore and all this stuff as well, because that is part of the injuries, and injuries will take you out straight away. And people misusing injuries, they'll chop their hand off and they're fighting in the next chapter. No, it's not happening. But anyway, that's me. Sorry, I went on a bit there.
Yeah, I'm exactly with you, Lee. Like, if you get too technical with stuff, it's like reading a manual rather than a story. You've got to strike like it's like a Venn diagram, of like technicality, realism in the middle. Just that sort of happy little brutal segments where you hit the happy ground. It's like, I've just had a thought then, like, one of the best fight scenes I've actually watched in a film recently is it's the last fight scene of the new Naked Gun. Like, it's probably the most realistic. I don't know if you guys have seen it, not to ruin it for anyone, but basically they're doing this big martial arts power up thing, and that guy runs at him, and Liam Neeson just absolutely punches him in the stomach and just drops him. And he's like, you punched me in the stomach, and that's it, fight done. Yeah.
I'm also reminded of The Princess Bride as you're talking about technical terms, Lee, because that's
they're real terms. He actually says real terms in that film. Sorry,
and they're balanced nicely. So but they're balanced nicely. Again, so they mention it and they say, oh, if if you're using that, then somebody would use this. Like, yes, but I also use this, and they're not throwing it too hard. It's just almost like using that to demonstrate that these two swordsmen know what they're doing, but not like doing too in depth. But as you say, they are real terms. Which
it was a genius bit of writing. It was like comic relief, but at the same time, it was actually you would counter that with it was like, oh, that's nice, that's good.
Yeah. Charlie, Steve, any other things that tropes or things that you think people should avoid, or Charlie, that you would not want to see as a reader as well?
I think as the guy just mentions, is if it's unrealistic, if a guy's been stabbed 5 times and he's got an arrow sticking out of him and he's still going, he's still battling forward, it's you think, well, that's not, I think when I was younger, perhaps I think, yeah, that's right, because that's what the Hollywood movies tell me can happen, and you can have half, as you said, Lee, or some movie, a dreadful thing on Netflix the other night, it was a Japanese-based thing, and guy had his hand chopped off, and he kept fighting. He's like, that wouldn't happen. You'd be writhing around in, certainly with it. So I think it's that sort of balance between that. You want something that's gory and it's got the sort of realism, but not just sort of the hero purposely getting through, or someone knowing that, well, they're the main character, so they're going to be fine, and just killing off side characters is a bit by the numbers. I don't think those books don't get the same attention or don't grab the reader as strongly as some of the descriptions the guys have just given.
I used to term punch death in my notes. So I'll be like, right, I'm going to kill this beloved, darling character that's probably one of the main characters. Gut punch death, completely pointless, out of nowhere, bam, dead. Sorry, mate. Next character takes over. The best way.
So don't get attached to anyone when you're reading Lee's books.
Never.
Yeah, that's the lesson.
I think just to sort of echo what everyone's already. I mean, and for me, it's anything that breaks the vibe. This is no different to any other scene in a book. It's if something moves away from the style that I've been enjoying, and suddenly we enter a fight scene or a battle scene, and the vibe shifts because for whatever reason the writer assumes, oh, I need to make this more over stylized, or go the other way and make it really gritty and embedded in realism. If it shifts away from what I've been enjoying up to that point, and Frank, you made the point here, it pulls you out of the writing, and that is kind of the cardinal sin for any author. If you force a reader to kind of eject themselves from your story for any reason, to my mind, you've lost them, or at the very least, you're at risk of losing them. They're going to get wobbly from there. So over stylized, or go the other way and make it massively over stylized or completely implausible, as long as the rest of the book follows suit with that. And there's levels to it. But, we're talking about fantasy and sci-fi as well. So there's all sorts of world building you need to factor in. So I've got in my notes for later on when we want to talk realism, and it's kind of like, well, how do you accommodate kind of magic or any kind of heightened, you've got to factor all this into then what affects things. And I have no personal experience as Lee or Frank does, but from like desk-based research, you've got to really, for my kind of writing, which is more reality and sort of gritty, you have to do a bit of research and try and understand it as much as possible. So there's fight scenes with humans on humans, but what about if humans encounter wildlife? You watch like The Revenant and you see that grizzly bear taking on Leo and you think, shit, that's pretty intense. Is that what it's actually like? Yeah, probably it's a bear. Like you've got to kind of factor these in and make sure that you're, and I say that from an actual standpoint because The Hunter's Lament features such a fight scene, and I had to really think about it and describe the bear in the way that was, okay, no, this is not going to be a big, like massive grizzly, because that's just it's going to decimate things. It's got to be more of a winnable fight, but again, with some wounds in tow.
I think that's a good point, Steve. Like, if you just maybe think of like a sci-fi or something like that, where you might have armor or other elements to the thing where okay, you'll be able to take more damage because you've got the tech or whatever it is that allows you, it gives you that extra additional protection. And I recently read Tim Napper's Alien book, Alien Bishop, which is set immediately after Aliens, and it's got Space Marines. He's Australian, right? So there's an Australian Space Marine in there, obviously, which I quite enjoyed. But they've got various bits of armor, but that works up to a point. But so it does give them some abilities to take the hit. So it's still within that sort of that context of the world. So it's not unrealistic to say, well, okay, you can take a hit from a xenomorph, or you can get washed by an acid, and you're not going to immediately die, but you're not going to have very long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's rules that you can bend and break as long as you kind of cement them beforehand. It makes sense. And then Lee, to your point, kind of like sword fights are being sort of short, sharp, and pretty much one and done after a couple of blows. There are a few kind of golden rules like knife fights. I've got friends who are paramedics, and they will tell you that age-old phrase, the refrain is true: the winner of a knife fight dies in the ambulance. Like, knife fights are brutal, and they are mostly zero sum for everybody. Like nobody comes out a winner there, really.
No.
So
I do knife fighting as well. I do Bowie knife and tomahawk. But going back to your Revenant comment, that is just completely to the side. One of the only films one of the few films I've seen that actually gets axe fighting right. They're actually perfect in that. But again, if you get, I've been involved in all sorts of nasty things like knife fights and things before, unfortunately, and you don't come away unscathed. You will get cut if you go into a knife fight. So kids, don't fight with knives.
Swords only, right? That's the moral here, kids.
Only swords.
See, I think one important thing as well to remember is, if you are writing fantasy, like you've got to establish the rules of your world first, which then kind of flips everything that we've all said on its head. It's like I think one thing I wrote a while back, where it was like an opening fight scene for Horns of the Hunter, and basically like there's one guy and he was fighting with one arm but still carrying on and still like coming out with unpleasant quips at the other guy, and then he gets his head ripped clean off and still manages to blink before it gets booted clean over a set of mountains. And that is absolutely absurd. Like, and if you're reading that like a general fight scene, you'd be like, "What? What's going on here?" But like the way that you got to think is like, if you've established that like these characters are capable of that kind of thing, like if you read that book, that was like a fight between two giant demigods. So obviously they're like tougher, and it's like if you think about like the Lord of 40k, Warhammer. Like the Primarchs, if you read some of their books, they're like walking around with broken backs. They've been shot about 10 times, stabbed. One of them's got a leg hanging off, and he's still just like one-shotting people out in the colder space, with no protective gear on. So, there is like exceptions to the rule, I would say.
Well, I think that does bring us on to the next topic very nicely, which is, how realistic do you have to be, or how do you balance that realism? I mean, the question we also have in the notes that we sent around before is, can you really have one guy filled with arrows with one arm hanging off, still charging around the battlefield? So I think, taking from what you just said there, Frank, the answer is sometimes.
Yeah.
But you have to establish that before. So so how do you establish that realism? And what I'm also definitely getting here is that I shouldn't write any like Game of Thrones fan fiction with Goku in there, because that's going to really throw off the vibe. Lots of spinning. So how do you balance that, and how realistic do you need to be? Because obviously, Lee, you've also talked about like balancing storytelling. Steve, do you have any come to you first for any?
Yeah, I was just, I'm going to sort of throw a bit of a grenade in the room, because reality is quite weird, right? If you look kind of through the documented human history, there are so many instances where stuff that's happened to someone and they've survived it. I'm not saying they carry on fighting, but the humans are both incredibly resilient and also insanely fragile. There's a famous case of, I can't remember her name, but there was a 17-year-old who, there was a plane crash over the jungle in South America somewhere. She fell 10,000 feet into the jungle, survived, managed to trek for a couple of days back to civilization safety, and survived it. And she lived another 40, 50 years, whatever. And then by the same token, you get people who, if you fall wrong, or you trip over a pavement and you just hit your head in the wrong place, that's it, game over. So reality is kind of like the whole sort of peppered with arrows. I'm kind of like, well, if the arrows aren't hitting any major organs, they're not going to be in good shape, but they might survive that. Like, again, not an expert, but most arrow wounds in war are not instant kill. That's the other thing that you see from sort of Hollywood movies, is there'll be an archer just firing off and it's instantly killed the opponent, whoever gets struck by an arrow. Reality is, it's going to hurt, and they might die of infection a couple of days later, and it'll probably take them out of the battle, but it's not necessarily going to be an instant death. So I think, again, it's just, we've talked about it a lot already, and this will ring true throughout. It's all about balance for me. Like, the kind of writing I enjoy and the kind of writing that I actually write is kind of gritty realism. So I quite like keeping it on the level where I can, but I'm also very well aware that, sometimes strange things happen and people survive things they really shouldn't have survived. Or someone just slips wrong or trips over something. I think kind of the chaos of a battle scene as well, if you can write that well, because battles were never ever pleasant places, and they never will be in the future either. Obviously, we're a bit more distanced from sort of hand-to-hand war fighting these days, but if you are writing that kind of sword shield combat, I do think that is just an insane level of kind of chaos that you need to get into there. And going back to kind of the heroes, that's what I love about that book, because you get kind of both the zoomed in insanity of it, but you also get the zoomed out, just you see kind of the how nuts it all is, really.
Charlie, do you have any sort of balances against the realism versus the, before we go into, I know I think you have lots of thoughts.
Yeah, I think it comes to that context of the world, but is it, if it's a gritty, grim dark type story, then it is going to be deeply unpleasant. There are going to be people dropping left, and it's chaos. You won't know what's happening left, right, center. And for me, that's the best that I do quite enjoy. And I said recently reading the I suppose more sort of historical fiction. So we were mentioning sort of Bernard Cornwell at the start. So I think Baptiste sort of Japanese sort of that sort of samurai sort of battles was akin to that. The start with the plan, and what ended up saving the day, and particularly is a cavalry charge that comes and breaks the opposition. But it's looking like that in that scenario, there's a lot of honor. So people, they're going there. They know they're almost going to say, we are going to die. We're not expecting to survive this battle. So they're almost seeking that honorable death at all costs. So there's always a level of disappointment with some of them when the cavalry charge arrives, because the plans have changed. But it shifts that battle, which I think which it would if you introduce a new element, whether it's more men or different weapons or other environments, and I think that can come into it. So I think it just comes back to that context. But if if something just magically 20,000 guys appear over the hill and save the day, it's like, well, 20,000 people aren't going to move that quickly. Is that, and that again pulls you out of the story a little bit. So I think that's
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the Deus Ex Machina, isn't it? They're just suddenly something swoops in and saves them. So yeah, Lee, Frank, any ideas or more ideas of how to balance that sort of realism versus the story aspect of it?
I would say that, I mentioned this before, but you've got to have it like, I like to have it so that it's like you can feel the hurt, but you don't get so realistic enough that you lose the enjoyment factor. Do you know what I mean? Like if you dive too deep into realism, sometimes you run that risk of like, the reader's gonna be like, and get pulled out the story, like I said before. So you need to stylize what you're actually putting on the page enough to thrill the reader. So realistic enough to hurt, stylized enough to thrill, that kind of thing. General guideline for me.
Yeah. I mean, touching on what Steve said about people flying out of planes and things, I mean, adrenaline does play a huge factor. I mean, I imagine when Alex wrote down the arrows and you were thinking Boromir. Tell me you were thinking Boromir.
I mean, always, and never far from my thoughts.
Now, I don't think that's necessarily over unrealistic. It's not happening all the time. It was one time where one guy was filled with arrows and he kept fighting because he was just badass. I mean, that is possible. And adrenaline can do incredible things, absolutely incredible things. I've been fighting before. The adrenaline's up. I broke my hand in the middle of a fight once, and I kept going. Got through the fight. It was great. And then I took my glove off and I was like, it all went to pieces, and I could not have picked up another sword for the rest of the day. But yeah, adrenaline can do crazy things. And I've heard all sorts of, similar to Steve, so many crazy stories about adrenaline. I'm just looking at my notes. I wrote, how realistic do we need to be? As above. So that's really lazy. But again, it is a balance between realism and actually good storytelling, basically. I try and be very realistic. I'm very gritty, very grimdark. I will occasionally throw in sort of the forbidden punch for punch scenes, but I'll mix them in. I'm thinking of in my newest book, which is not out yet, which is everyone's been waiting for it for like a good few years now, so I apologize about that. But there's a fight scene in that between two people where it's very, I'm thinking Tarantino, I'm thinking Kill Bill, they're in the rain, and I think I use the line something like two warriors standing in the rain, and then I'll have a blow for blow, a quick exchange, like literally a short paragraph, and it stops. There's rain, pacing, and it's important. So I'm doing it with them right now, pacing, and then two warriors standing in the rain. Another quick exchange, and that is quite a long fight because it is supposed to be quite epic. Normally, that would have been over on the first exchange, most likely. Someone would have got a lucky axe hit in the face or something like that. But I tried to play it out over three, the rule of three repeats of this standing still in the rain, waiting for each other. Very samurai, very, very Tarantino. And that, I thought that was when I wrote it, I sat back all smug, thinking that's a really nice blend of storytelling devices and literal blow for blow. Quite realistic, keep it short, good pacing stuff. So I'm quite excited for everyone to read that. If anyone wants to get back to me on some feedback on that when it comes out, if it ever comes out, if I ever finish that book, which I will. It's just been 5 years. But basically, as we've been saying, we've been discussing this realism point for quite a bit at this panel now, haven't we, really? It's just that balance. It really is all about balance between the storytelling elements and the gritty realism. Try and keep it gritty and real. But there is absolutely room for a superhuman, seemingly superhuman wound to be ignored, for adrenaline reasons, or if there is canon that would allow it to work. So absolutely,
yeah. I think the adrenaline aspect is something as well that, if you're a clever writer, you could probably work that in. Like, it does do crazy things. I remember I had a professional fight a while back, quite a while back now, actually. It was 10 years ago. And it was against a lad, and I was shitting my pants, like top and bottom of it. He was really big. He was a lot bigger than I was expecting when I got in the ring with him. He was absolutely ripped to bits, but I was like this short, chubby kid. And I remember trying to pin him in the corner in the first round, just advancing on him, and he just absolutely smacked me in the face with his right hand. And I didn't know it at the time, but it broke my nose with the first punch. Absolutely flattened my nose, free nose job. It was fantastic. But I didn't realize until I got out the ring, and then I sat down, and I think it was about 20 minutes later where I was just like, oh my God, my face. I couldn't see through my nose. And I look back at photos of it now, and it was obviously just like flattened. Like, so there is an adrenaline aspect as well that I think that probably more writers should consider, like, adding in, like, because you could add a lot of like character flavor, like, you know, where
And it sounds like because you guys are used to have fought in real estate, you know, you've had experiences that I fought the pavement once when I was running and slipped and managed to snap my metatarsal, which is a common boxing injury, and I sort of got up, my hand was up the wrong angle. I sort of, oh, okay, that's all right. But I'll walk back to work and I'll have a shower and then I'll see how I feel. And by the time I walk back, I was like, yeah. So, and I felt relatively okay walking back. And, you know, obviously that it must be in the adrenaline and get back and then going. Then you suddenly, you know, all that wears off and you start, well, no, hang on. No, I'm very much not all right. But it's a good point, actually. I think, you know, of it's that balance. It's not superhuman because, as you said, there are real life events where people have done very amazing things or carried on, you know, be it in war or otherwise with that adrenaline. So it sounds like that's quite a good point for writers to pick up and sort of use that in their fight scenes.
There is absolutely documented cases in war. I mean, horrific injuries in Vietnam or in World War, people getting half the head blown off and then not realizing and carrying on, you know, because of adrenaline. Look at even Stamford Bridge, the Vikings were invading Britain. That guy held that bridge, you know, after many, many wounds, and he kept going. I mean, that guy that was like a Boromir-esque. You know, how many times did they stab him with a spear? And he was still swinging that axe, holding that bridge. I mean, and that was a documented case. And it's probably a little bit of, you know, storytelling, a little bit of elaboration in there, you know, Chinese whispers, you know, and all that. But that probably did happen, you know. So
it's got some basis in truth, though. You know, it's absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the other things you mentioned, or has been mentioned in that last sort of answer, was pacing. So has anybody? So I think that would be good to touch on as well. Like, how do you pace a battle scene or a fight scene well, or how do you do it poorly? I know we've talked about going too far down the, you know, he threw a right hook and I threw up my arm, and you know, that sort of, maybe that kind of thing. But how? Any tips or any ideas of how to pace it well? Steve?
I think that for me, it's a bit of a cop out, but it's not really that different to any other bit of writing. You've got to mix it up. You've got to make sure that you're hitting the key beats, you're dwelling on the right bits, and then you're also staccatoing through the bits that need staccatoing through. So to Lee's point earlier, you know, individual fight scenes are quick. They happen and then they're quite flashy. So you need to pace it like that so that it doesn't kind of drag. But by the same token, battles, you know, they're not kind of never ending. And, you know, people get very tired very quickly. So you've got to make sure you've got it. We've talked about it a lot, but balance, basically. To me, it's kind of zooming in, zooming out, speeding up, slowing down where you need to, but making sure that it feels right. I think any author will tell you, you've got to read your own work kind of loosely or read it aloud or get someone else to read it to you to really get a sense of, is this being paced well? Am I dragging too much? Am I dwelling too much on this individual fight scene? Again, I think the age-old advice of kill your darlings, quite literally when it comes to some characters, but also when you like a character, you want to spend more time with them as an author. In fight scenes, that's not necessarily the case because there'll be so much, certainly in battle scenes, there'll be so much going on that you can't necessarily zone in on this one character too often because that will then it will drag it down. And I also think as well, the other thing is that not just the fight scene or the battle scene itself, but how is the tension being built up to that point? Because I read some books, and this is just a personal taste thing, I read some books that are kind of just fight after fight after fight, battle after battle after battle, and it doesn't massively interest me because the stakes feel lowered because there's always just something else around the corner, more violence around the corner. So I always think if I'm writing a battle scene, there needs to be a lot of building towards it, or even just an individual kind of one-on-one fight scene. You need to build that tension first so that it becomes satisfying as a reader to get to it and then get through it as well. You
said the magic word there, Steve, stakes. It is stakes. If there aren't stakes, it's not interesting. It has to be high stakes every second, you know, otherwise there's no point. I agree.
100%. Whether it's the kingdom or a invested character that you've got in as well. And I think sometimes also that shifting of perspective, comes into that pacing as well. Like, you know, different, you know, if it's multiple characters or different viewpoints, either from either side, or that sort of helps with your pacing, but also helps as a reader sort of give you, you know, it's a chaotic scene, so it's not going to all make sense, but you're pulling in those details and sort of feeding to that picture that you're reading and immersing yourself in it is quite effective for a reader as well, I think.
Yeah, I find there are two times that I really, really concentrate on pacing, and that is in the horror scenes. And when it's particular, I'm trying to engineer how my reader is feeling. Right, so I will really, really take that. I'll take a really, really like boring, like look at how long my sentences are. So in a fight scene and in horror is when I do it. So I didn't finish my sentence, but so in a fight scene, as I was saying just a minute ago on that other fight scene, I will put like a nice long sort of framing device in there, where I'll slow the pace down, and then I'll go fight, quite short, fast sentences, little short bits of description, not overly technical in its language use, in its terminology, but I will describe certain movements, and then I'll stop, and there'll be a little moment of pause and retrospect where I'll then have a longer sentence. So I'll use longer or shorter sentences to engineer how fast the reader's reading. So I imagine them like reading the page, and all of a sudden when the fights are going, they're going, ooh, fast, slow down, take a breath, ooh, have a bit of description, maybe zoom out of the battle perhaps and look at it from somewhere else, but then zoom straight back in, fast. And I'll really engineer like with the sentence length, usually short, sharp sentences. And it's great for horror if you're trying to get someone's heart rate up on it. And again, that heart rate's up in the fight scene too, so it's good for fight scenes. And that's the only time not the only time, but the main two times I really zoom in on pacing and really like edit it and read it and make sure the pacing is good. And that's how I do it. It's usually with long sentences and short sentences, which sounds really simple, but it actually is very effective. So.
Yeah. There's an author that I usually refer to for this kind of thing. It's Bernard Cornwell, especially with the Warlord Chronicles and the Saxon stories, because I mean they're virtually like the same series, really, depending on your perspective. One's just our theory and the other's not. But the thing with them is that it like all the combat in it is basically like it's either a personal duel or like it's the shield wall. And shield wall combat was, notoriously slow, grinding, dirty, horrible, nasty. Like really, it was like Dark Ages trench warfare in a way. And the way that I find that like Cornwell does it is that it's like what Lee just said. He'll zoom in, he'll zoom out, so you get like, because it's all first person too, so you get like the sort of broader sort of like main character's commander perspective on how the battle is going, and like this kind of like really drudge, the men are sweating, they're tired, like everyone stinks, everyone's like crying and getting hurt and stuff, and then you're zooming in and he's talking about like like a sneaky spear like coming under and like grazing off an iron plate on his boot, that kind of thing, and like like some screaming Northman in his face that's getting an axe to the neck, and then back out, the lines bending, men are getting pressed together, people are getting squashed, bones are breaking, morale is dipping, and then mysterious second shield ball appears over the horizon and squashes them together, that kind of thing. And it's like a literary like magnifying glass, like you're coming out big picture in nasty grim little details, and it's almost like conducting like an orchestra or something. I find as well, because the way he does it, it'll be the sort of the slow build up where that kind of close combat fighting, especially back in those days, men didn't want to fight because they knew what was coming. They weren't particularly keen on it, so some of them would be stood about 20 feet away, just shouting insults and getting drunk and flashing other people to try and like provoke them into doing something stupid. And it'll build up that way. So it's like quiet, and then just big clash of shields, roaring warfare, grind, and then it's all mud, dirt, and it's weird, like the lull point there, where you're getting like in the mud, dirt, the piss, the shit, all that filthy stuff.
He has to read my notes.
Yeah.
I wrote this shit, God tears.
Like that's like the crescendo. Yeah, that, and the weird that sort of dirty lull pit kind of bit is like the crescendo of the fight, and then there's like a big sort of big momentary breath where like something happens and it breaks and maybe like the lines come apart, and then that's how he'll pace it. So it's like like building yourself up, like you're drawing breath, and then just like a big scream, and then exhale of breath, and then that's the battle done. And he's also very good at like the aftermath side of things, where there's people knocking around, there's wounded, there's prisoners, there's slaves being taken, there's crying women, like the Conan thing. You know, it's fantastic, and I think it's one that you like. You know, especially if you're new to writing like battle scenes, just read some Saxon Stories books, any of them, because there's about 20. You know, or the Warlord Chronicles, absolutely excellent. Like, you know, they're always ones that I go back to if I'm not feeling that what I'm writing is like dirty or horrible enough, or like is like, you know, not paced in the right way. It hasn't got that sort of beginning, middle, end sort of structure that a battle should really have, and that they all tend to have. Bennett Cornwell, Warlord Chronicles, Saxon Stories. Read some of the fights from that. They're fantastic.
Echo that as well. I just want to just very quickly pick up. It's nothing to do with pacing, but just something you said there, Frank, about people not necessarily wanting to fight. I think that's a really, really, when we're talking about realism, you got to bear in mind, humans are not, we're social creatures. We're not designed to hurt each other. Like, it really messes with our brains. It breaks our brains. That's why, again, through kind of like modern history, we've tried to distance ourselves from the violence as much as possible to make it easier to do violence to one another, because it really isn't. Like, humans are not designed to hurt each other at all, and it has an impact. So I think even kind of post-battle and post-fight scenes, it's worth, as a writer, exploring, well, how does this impact characters that were involved in those situations? Because that is going to be traumatic as hell if it's a big battle or even a one-on-one fight. Even if they've come out as the victor and their opponent's been killed, that's still going to mess with them. And again, how that actually manifests is going to be different from character to character. Some characters will stamp that down and they might just put on a big bravado, but then actually they're, you know, got PTSD, they're really terrified inside, and that manifests as them sort of pulling that out in different ways. And then likewise, you might have someone who just got very lucky and has like supreme levels of sort of survivor guilt, and how does that manifest? So it's also, it's not just writing the fight scenes themselves, but it's thinking, well, how does this change the arc of the people involved beyond it? And then if there is another one, how does that change their perspective to it? Again, going back to the heroes, because brilliant book, there's a character in that who, I think he's like a teenager and he really wants to go to war. He's really excited about it. He gets to war and it's fucking terrible. He hates it. It's really horrible. It's really grim. But he ends up surviving. I'm trying not to name it so I don't spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it. But he ends up not only surviving, but coming out with a reputation as being a fearsome warrior, which is total nonsense because he barely picked up a weapon during that because he was just pissing himself in a cupboard. So it's a brilliant kind of like microcosmic look at actually the trauma of war on an individual. And I just think that was an important thing to, you know, Frankie sort of touched on it there, that they knew that this was going to be horrible, so they tried to avoid it at all costs. But if they can't avoid it, well, how does that impact them afterwards as well?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting you say that as well, because one of the other things that we just sort of touched on very briefly was stakes as well. And yeah, I think it's very important that, you know, that it's not, you were saying, Steve, about, you know, a book you were reading that was just sort of fight after fight after fight after fight, and you kind of lose interest almost because there's just, yeah, the stakes are not built up enough. And it's very different to Lee and Frank's experience, but I, you know, run a D&D game with some friends, and I always find that that's kind of very interesting, that you get a very immediate feedback from that sort of stuff in terms of whether or not your storytelling is any good, because your players will tell you. But with the combat for that, it's the same kind of thing. If you're just throwing people together to have a fight scene, then it's kind of boring. So balancing that story. So I think the stakes there, I wanted to, you know, pull that out as a good example as well of stuff that we want to talk about, or things that make a good fight scene. So we are probably coming up. We could probably talk about this for a very long time. But so you talked, Frank, certainly, and on Lee's notes, there's a lot of discussion of the gore element of it. And I know that we've got some gritty writers here, but how do you make that balance between, you know, where it's too much? Charlie, do you have any idea or any sort of lines for yourself, or think where, you know, it's gory because it, you know, you want it to be, or it needs to be because it's a fight scene, it's a battle, it doesn't want to be too fluffy, but then where does that push into gratuity? And you think, I'm just going to put this down because I don't want to read about, you know, that too much. Do you find that there's a line for yourself?
It might sound terrible. I haven't found that line yet. Just don't kill the dog. That's the main thing, you know.
Yeah.
That'll have my line there. You know, sort of, not that I'll go John Wick on you, but it'll be yeah.
Get a bad review at least.
Look, I think it's all you know. It's all relative to the world that you're in, and you know, if it's medieval world, you know, you're gonna it is going to be brutal. You know, as we were talking there about a shield wall fighting, and there's a lot of, you know, evidence of how that was how that worked, and it would have been horrible and brutal because that's what they had. You know, they didn't have the precision weapons of today. As you mentioned, Steve, you know, we remove ourselves and we press a button and we obliterate an entire city, which is as horrific as any battle, but it's not. We're not seeing it. We're not you know, open to it perhaps, thankfully. But I think it comes to that concept. If it's just sort of gratuitous for the sake of, well, that comes back to, I think, a bit like the stakes. You know, if there's just constant people getting, you know, 15 guys in a row getting killed for absolutely no reason, well, it more gets boring more than anything else. It's not sort of put it off, but it's like it's not gripping me with the story. But if it's like, I don't think these guys are going to go out, or that, you know, a particular character I care about, or, you know, it's being hooked into it, and then I think I can forgive a fair amount if it's a good story and I'm hooked into it, and it's within the context of what we're talking about. But yeah. But other people, it's a very individual thing. Other people, yeah, there's certain things they just don't want to read, and that's, you've 100% got to respect that. But
absolutely.
I think it just goes back to kind of where is the Overton window of gore and violence, and that depends on the book. It's again echoing what we've already said earlier. It's about not breaking the vibe of your storytelling. So if your story is grim, people should expect the same level of grimness to come through in the violent scenes. One of my favourites, I only read it this year, Christopher Buehlmann's Between Two Fires. There's no necessarily like major battle scenes in it. There's a lot of kind of individual fighting, but it's really, really grisly. And the way I tried to describe it to my wife is what kind of violence it is. It's kind of squishy violence is how I talked about it. It feels very personal and almost biological, and there's kind of a level of like gore to it and visceralness that completely fits the book. Love it. Absolutely. Really, really enjoyed that book. But if you took that level of writing and stuck it in a Joe Abercrombie book, it wouldn't make sense. Joe Abercrombie is brutal and gritty and grim, but it's not as kind of squishy as I keep talking about it.
Yeah,
so I think again, it's go
on. I'm reading at the moment In the Shadow They're Dying, which is Anna Smith Spark and Michael R. Fletcher, and I think you've just nailed it. I was trying to think how I described it, and it is wet, gory, very visceral. But, you know, and part of it is written from this perspective of this demon that is literally pulling people limb from limb and doing quite horrific things to whole groups of people. If it was in another story, no, would it work? No, it wouldn't. But, you know, it's very much from it. So this is it's a city under siege. There's a demon on the loose. It's not going to be pretty. And then again, also, if you know the authors in question, that's part of their other work, so it's not exactly out of context. But I think, you know, it's part of that world, and, you know, elsewhere, no, it wouldn't work.
And Fletcher doesn't hold back. Fletcher never holds back.
No.
I take a page out of that book as well. To be fair, I've written on my notes: gore and gratuity. Personally, no limits, no lines to be drawn, pure mercilessly. Mess your readers up. And that's all I've written on that. But I write those sort of books. That's the sort of stuff I write, you know. So there is such a time where it's like Chekhov's gun. If it doesn't serve a purpose, then it shouldn't be in there, basically. But I write horror. I write gory horror. So I take great. It's probably need looking at my head a little bit there, but I take great pleasure in writing absolutely sickening horror scenes where terrible things happen. You know, I watch a lot of horror movies, things like Terrifier, things like that. A lot of people hate that. They're like, "Oh, it's disgusting." And I'm like, "This is great. Look at that kill. Look at that guy getting his skin peeled off. Amazing." And I'll do that sort of stuff. I love it. It's great. But you don't read my books if you're not into that sort of thing. And if you do pick one up by accident, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, apology.
I was just going to jump in there as well and say that it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think, again, this is perhaps a trap that some writers fall into. They feel they need to describe that level of viscera and gore all the time. There's other ways you can do it. Frank, you talked about kind of the smells of a battle scene or a fight scene. What people are hearing, like if you get the right sound, which is kind of like a wet crunching noise, that can do more than describing his arm snapped in half. So there's
texture and smell, I think, very much.
Exactly, that's a play to the reader's senses, and if you really want to kind of immerse themselves in it, pick on every sense. Don't just focus on what they're seeing. So I think kind of like gore and again, it's all subjective to the reader because they'll bring their own experience to the table, and they might be more susceptible to reading about sounds or smells or whatever than they are necessarily about visuals. So I think mix it up, and it's just keep the vibe of your story, and if it works for you, if you want to go down the Lee route, absolutely do, because there's definitely a readership for it.
The way to do it is to relate it to things that but that the reader will know. Like we all know what sick smells like. Some of us don't know what blood smells like. So you got to relate it to something like maybe, and then juxtapose that with something like food, something that's going to make. So I do it in my book where the guy can smell something. He's like, "That's really tasty. What's that really nice smell?" And it's a dead body burning. And then you know what I mean? You've just got to relate it to real modern readers' real life experiences. And unfortunately, we don't live in the medieval times where we've witnessed the aftermath of the battle. So we might not know what spilled intestines smells like. So you've got to relate that to something that they, without removing the immersion of saying it smells like your wheelie bin. They don't have wheelie bins. So you've got, it smells like your rubbish heap, your mitten, or like, I don't know. But you've got to pick on those senses. That is super important, actually, Steve. Yeah, totally. So make them feel sick. It's good.
Yeah. It's like, that's I think that comes back to the point on realism as well. Like, Lee, you'll probably relate to this when you've been doing your long sword fighting and stuff. Like, I've been in quite a few fights where either I've ended up with a cut or someone else has ended up with a cut. My last fight, I remember coming back to the corner, and it's like, in Muay Thai, generally speaking, before you go out to fight, you are anointed with Thai oil, like this liniment stuff. It smells very strongly of aniseed mixed with like a little bit of Vaseline to sort of, it's like it acts as like an analgesic, and it sort of helps to warm you up before the fight, and it stops like grazes and things like that from happening, and like chafing and blistering when you're grappling. So there's always a very strong smell of that, which sort of plays into it. And any Thai boxer will tell you, when you smell that, it reminds you of going out and fighting. So your blood will immediately get up.
Yeah. So don't get you any licorice all sorts is what we're saying.
But I remember very distinctly, like my last fight, coming back to the corner between rounds, and all I could smell was the liniment, because that's all you can smell in the fight, and sweat. But then saying to my coach, "I'm a cut, I can smell blood. I'm a cut as you cut me." And like he was like, "No, you cut him. It's all over your face," like that kind of thing. So like the smell and the texture is actually like an element of realism as well. And it plays into it. It brings back memories. It does things to you. It'll get your blood up, get your heart rate going. And just to come back to what Charlie was saying as well, I think because I've read quite a few of on his books, started with the Court of the Broken Knife, and there's a lot of things in that which are all very textured and smell based. And it's again, like she does things in her books that work very, very well in her world that wouldn't necessarily work outside of it, or might seem unnecessary, but it all sort of ties in together with like this really sort of messy amalgamation of like, descriptions of like flies crawling over people's dead bodies, plagues, emptying bowels, sick, and general rotten decay. That is all sort of part of her writing, and that's sort of really like unique, kind of weirdly poetic way that she does it as well, which is very strange.
There's beauty in the darkness. There's beauty in the darkness.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yes, we can imagine we got her and Fletcher working together. That's
yeah, she did very well.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we're probably we could go on for forever with this sort of stuff. There's lots of details in there. So are there any other? I thought the last one we had was how to write a great believable battle scene. I feel like we've covered a lot of that ground. The verisimilitude within the world that you've created, or the book that you're writing. So does anybody have any one final tip? So just a quick sort of your most important tip, and we'll go around and then we'll sort of wrap up. But we'll go clockwise again. But so Lee, if you've got like one top tip for writing a great believable battle or fight scene, what would you give?
Keep that balance. Don't shy away from the horror of war, and kill anything that moves, like without plot armor.
Fabulous. Frank, what about you? top tip.
Yeah, I would echo what Lee has just said. Top tip though is gore should be considered seasoning, not the meal.
I'll get that on a t-shirt, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to print that up, Frank.
Steve.
I think, yeah, just we've covered a lot of the key beats. Stakes are important, realism, use all those senses, understanding that fighting is a traumatic experience. All of that stuff makes sense to me. To write a great battle scene, it's a trick that journalists use all the time to talk about wars. Actually, fun enough, but to tell a big story, tell a small story. So that kind of works for me. Is that zoom in and then zooming out? That's probably the key thing to take away.
And Charlie, what about yourself?
Well, with all these talents around the call here, I don't think I'll be suggesting any tips on writing. That would be a bit ingenuous of me. But I think, just that sort of, if you're treating that reader with that respect, that you're taking them on that journey and pulling them into that, then I think, great, please do that. The more of that, I think, then you're going to be sucked into it. You've got some sort of skin in the game, as it were, in terms of you're invested with the characters in the world, and even if they end up doing horrible things to those characters that you love, it's more enriching experience for the reader, definitely.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that brings us to a nice close. So thank you so much to all of our panelists here. They all had some lovely and very useful things to say. So we'll go around clockwise again, because I love my clocks. And just if you could let everybody know where they can find you, your stuff, and hopefully everyone will reach out, buy all the books, watch all the RPG streams. So Lee, where can people find you and your books?
I'm on Facebook and all the social medias. Most of the time I'm on Instagram and Facebook these days. But if you go to my website, www.leeconleyauthor.com, there's lots of fun stuff on there. All my books are on there. Check out Dead Sagas, which is my flagship series. That's A Ritual of Bone, A Ritual of Flesh. New one, A Ritual of Blood's out soon. And just if you drop me an email on Facebook or my website, so if you ever want information.
Perfect. Frank, what about yourself?
You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/GrimFrankie. You can also find me on my website, frankdorrian.com. It probably is still in need of a bit of construction, though. You can sign up to my newsletter there if you want a bunch of free stories in your inbox. And you can also check out my books on Amazon, Horns of the Hunter, like my flagship series, Tales of Lower like Lee has his Dead Sagas. So, yeah, there you go.
Perfect. And Steve?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, stevepannett.com. All the usual places. Anyway, you can buy books, go and check them out. I'm on social media, but you're better off going through the website for that. You can also get a 1,000-word short story for free if you sign up to my mailing list. Again, all the details are on stevepannett.com.
Perfect.
Got mine this week. Charlie Cavendish. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, mainly a little bit more on Instagram these days. Reviews on Fanfic and the Four Bids in the Bookpocalypse. We try to get out to 2 episodes or so a month with my fellow bidsman. Ironically, I'm the one that doesn't have a beard, but looking around the table, you'd all be welcome additions to the show with the follically enhanced faces I can see. So we're doing interviews there. We do some RPG sessions, and I'm also just trying to do some one-on-one sort of shorter interviews, which are called the 5 o'clock shadow. So keep an eye out for some of those coming out shortly as well.
Perfect. Amazing. And you can find Spotlight Indie on spotlightindie.co.uk and all the socials as well. And we are just getting started with our big indie weekend. So this is, I think, panel number 2. And we've got things coming today. We've got things coming tomorrow. We've got things coming on Sunday. We've got a load of pre-recorded panels and a load of live panels to turn up to. So, if you want to learn more about, audio or only rich people write books, and dispelling that myth and loads of other things, and a live instance of There's No Such Thing as a Stupid Question later today. So just join us. It's going to be an amazing weekend, and we'll see more from some more amazing panelists. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's been a really interesting discussion. So I hope it's been useful for you as well. And please go check out the books and their YouTube channels and RPGs and interviews and all that sort of stuff. And thank you so much. And we'll see you soon.